Well, good morning again, everybody, or whenever you see this, welcome back to Walking Through the Scriptures with Joseph Bahoda. I'm your host, Joe Bahoda, and I got a good one today. And I know you John MacArthur minions may come after me for this one, but I don't care. I'm compelled as a 20-year veteran in the Army and a 4-time combat veteran who actually has been diagnosed with PTSD myself. So this is very personal to me. I do have skin in the game with this one. I just found out through Dean Latini's channel, and thank you, Dean, for bringing this to my attention. I am compelled to say something because John MacArthur has literally lost his ever-loving mind, if you will. And he just said something apparently at a Q&A like setting or a conference or a session with a Grace Community Church, which is the church he pastors, but this is one of like their sister churches, if you will, of Grace Community Church, according to what Dean Latini was saying. He did a Q&A with Costi Hinn, and Costi Hinn was sitting right next to him. Now, here's the thing. I have a lot of respect for Costi Hinn because, you know, he's Benny Hinn's nephew, and he came out of the Prosperity Gospel, and in doing so, he exposed his uncle's ministry, and he exposed the Prosperity Gospel. I came out of the Prosperity Gospel. I came out of Word of Faith, so I totally applauded Costi Hinn for what he did there. However, I have no respect at all for Costi Hinn on this, because he sat there and agreed with John MacArthur. He was nodding his head the whole time as if he was in 100% agreement with what John MacArthur was saying. So for you John MacArthur minions, I'm sorry, but y'all need to hold him accountable to this one. He's dead wrong on this. He's ignorant. He has no idea what he's talking about. He's not medically qualified to say what he's saying. And he's just dead wrong. And again, as a 20-year Army vet and a 4-time combat veteran who's been diagnosed with PTSD myself, I felt personally compelled to say something. I'm going to show you a video here. I'm going to let you listen to it. And then I'm also in the description of my video, I'm going to include the link to this video so you can watch it yourself. He comes out and says there's no such thing as mental illness. There's no such thing as PTSD. And in children, there's no such thing as ADHD, OCD, or any of those other things. Now, and therefore, consequently, you know, don't give your kids medication. He's very much anti-medication because this was just, you know, something that Big Pharma made up so they can medicate our kids. That's also insulting to me because as a father who just adopted 2 children who are now 6 and 7, when you don't give them their meds, and I know this firsthand, they fidget with their hands or they rock back and forth like this, or they're so ADHD that their brains don't focus and calm down and they're literally pinging off the walls, and you may not be able to get them to focus long enough to do what you need to do. With my son, for instance, before we got his meds, we would send him to school and he would disrupt the class. He would literally like start jumping off tables and, you know, wrecking things in the school because he didn't know how to calm down. He thought he was, you know, in the jungle and, you know, he was Tarzan or whatever he was doing or being dinosaurs, and he was trying to attack people by jumping off the tables in kindergarten. Okay? But once he got his meds, he was able to focus and calm down to where he was able to listen to what the teachers were telling him. He was able to learn. And by the time he graduated kindergarten, believe it or not, he was actually reading at a 3rd grade level. Because his mind was able, through the meds, to slow down, focus, stop obviously jumping on tables and whatnot, listen to what the teachers were saying, to where now this was like a couple years ago. So, you know, he's in the 1st grade now. But back then he was in kindergarten, and by the time he graduated kindergarten, he was reading at a 3rd grade level. All because the meds helped his mind slow down and focus and concentrate on what he needed to do. Okay? So as a 20-year veteran and a 4-time combat veteran, and also a father who has 2 kids that are, you know, well, actually 3, but 2 that we just adopted on the spectrum with ADHD and all kinds of other stuff, John MacArthur owes people an apology for this one. Because obviously he's ignorant. He has no idea what he's talking about. And for people who've been at war, been shot at, been bombed, people like me, I got shot at. My plane was getting shot at by the Taliban as we were landing into Iraq. Our plane was getting shot at, tried to get shot down by the Taliban. So our C-130 was getting shot at as we were trying to land. And because of that, our pilot had to do a combat landing, which means he basically did a nosedive on purpose. So it felt like we were crashing. And by the way, the pilot didn't tell us he was doing this until after we landed. So we literally thought that we were going to die, thinking that our plane was crashing. And he had to do that. He had to land quickly because we were literally taking fire as the Taliban was trying to shoot our plane down. Needless to say, I don't like flying now. So when I do fly and I hit turbulence, my brain automatically goes back to that day. My brain automatically goes back to that moment. Okay? So yes, I do have skin in the game in this. I am personally involved in this. This is personal for me because he just insulted every single person who's ever been through a trauma, drama, and a traumatic event. He's insulted every combat veteran who's ever served in the military. Okay, this is another reason why I really cannot stand pastors who's never been in it talking about it like they have. Because they don't know what they don't know. And they insult every veteran who does know. And I'm here to tell you, John MacArthur owes anybody who's been through anything an apology. He owes our veterans an apology. John MacArthur owes an apology. Costi Hinn owes us an apology for agreeing with this. This is trash. John MacArthur, you're wrong. You're absolutely wrong, and you need to apologize, at least to anybody who's been through anything. But I can say, because the veterans, being in the Army is what I know, being a military man is what I know, you need to apologize to every veteran who's ever served. Because clearly you have no idea what you're talking about. And you need to apologize to anybody who's ever been through a traumatic event. You clearly have no idea what you're talking about. I can give you story after story after story of stuff that I've been through, my buddies have been through. John, you have no idea what you're talking about. You need to take it back and you need to apologize. This is sickening. Anyway, I'm gonna try to push my computer closer to so you can hear, because the volume's a little soft. But anyway, here we go.
Reading a book, an interesting book called A Profession Without Reason. It's a book that shows basically, this is pretty shocking to some of you, that psychiatry and psychology is finally admitting the noble lies that they've been telling for the last 100 years. And the major noble lie is there is such a thing as mental illness.
He already said the major noble lie is there's no such thing as mental illness. Yeah, okay.
Now, this isn't new. You have Thomas Saz back in the 1950s writing a book, who was a psychiatrist, on the myth of mental illness.
Here you just said the myth of mental illness by a book that was written in 1950s. That's 70 years ago, guys. That is not current. I mean, that's just disgusting, the fact that you would even use something 70 years ago to try to explain symptoms today. Particularly after all these wars that we've been in. In the 1950s, the Vietnam War didn't even happen yet, guys. Vietnam didn't even happen. We were still fighting the Korean War in the 1950s. Come on, John.
There's no such thing as PTSD. There's no such thing as OCD. There's no such thing as ADHD.
No such thing as PTSD. No such thing as ADHD. No such thing as OCD. So everything that combat veterans went through was garbage. All our kids who have this stuff. Now, granted, I will admit, there is some stuff that Big Pharma has pushed, and there is some diagnoses that they pushed on our kids just to get our kids medicated, and the whole opioid crisis and all of that. Granted, there is some truth to that. But to say our kids have nothing wrong with them, or medicine does no good, or there's no such thing as these diagnoses, some of them are legit, guys. You can't say they're all not legit. You can't say they're all not legit, because some of them are. As a parent who has kids on the spectrum, trust me in this, some of them are. Now, some of them aren't. Some of them they just throw these labels out because it's easy to give them a pill. I agree with that, but to say they're all fraudulent is a hot mess lie.
Those are noble lies.
Noble lies.
To basically give the excuse to, in the end of the day, to medicate people.
It's all pharma's fault.
And Big Pharma is in charge of a lot of that. If you understand, take PTSD for example.
Here we go.
What that really is grief. You were fighting a war, you lost your buddies, you have a certain amount of survival guilt because you made it back, they didn't.
So now he's going to talk like he's a combat veteran, like he knows. Granted, John, yes, we do suffer grief, but PTSD is more than grief. Like, again, any smells, sights, sounds. That's why people, when they hear like fireworks, they have a very hard time around fireworks because it reminds them of getting shot at when they were over there. And when that happens, they mentally and emotionally are automatically back there. That's why they get panic attacks and all this kind of stuff, John. John, you don't know what you're talking about. It's more than just the emotions of grief. It's actually the triggers that get you back there. Mentally and emotionally, you automatically go back there and you get anxiety and depression and you get triggers and you get all these emotional things that take you back there, and you get panic attacks because in your mind, you have this muscle reflex, this muscle memory that takes you back there, John. It's more than just grief, bro.
How do you deal with grief? Grief is a real thing. But grief is part of life. And if you can't navigate grief, you can't live life.
So it's just grief. So if you can't navigate what you've been through, if you can't navigate the fact that your buddies got blown up, if you can't navigate the fact that they got blown up and lost their legs when they hit an IED, if you can't deal with the fact that this stuff just happens, John, then what, we're a scumbag person? But that's this is where you're not getting, John. When you get blown up with an IED and your buddy loses his leg, that's not normal. When you're getting shot at by the Taliban and they're trying to shoot your plane down so your plane crashes, that's not a normal event. That's not everyday stuff, John. When you get a little girl who gets raped by some psycho, that's not a normal everyday event, John. That's not just part of life. That is an extreme traumatic event that happened, John. That's not normal. Going to war and getting blown up is not normal, John. That's why we need help dealing with it, because we experience something that's abnormal, John.
But if you clinically define that, you can give them a pill, a series of medications, and they end up in LA homeless on the sidewalk.
So yeah, that's another thing he said. So if you give them that stuff, they're just going to be, basically he's insinuating that anybody who gets medication is just going to, be a druggie and end up homeless on the sidewalk, because apparently that's what happens when you take you're actually anti-anxiety, anti-depression, or, stuff that helps you with PTSD. You're just going to be a druggie and homeless on the sidewalk. Wow, so apparently the medication I take for this kind of stuff, because I do take stuff, John, and clearly I'm on the street homeless, and clearly I'm a druggie, right? I'm clearly a hopeless, homeless, druggie veteran, because I take my meds, right, John? John MacArthur, you need to apologize. Costi Hinn, you need to apologize for nodding your head in agreement. And again, I'll give you the description of this video so you can see Costi Hinn's like, yes, John. Yes, John. And that's another thing about this stuff. As John MacArthur's getting older in age, his yes men and his minions and his supporters, they just basically support him without questioning anything he says, because in the spirit of trying to give him honor, they just go along with it, and they just nod their head, and they're like, yes, John, this is awesome. This is, go for it, Daddy. Go for it, Grandpa. You're the mighty man of God, so say whatever you want to say, because you're, the godfather of all this. Because there's nobody better than John MacArthur, so how dare you question the godfather? And they just nod their head like little stupid minions, like they have no backbone to stand up to Godfather Daddy Johnny Mac. Well, I will, because he's wrong as wrong can get here. Costi Hinn, you need to be ashamed of yourself. And any of these other preachers around J Mac need to be held accountable. They need to be, ashamed of themselves too. And I'll just say this. If this is the kind of garbage that J Mac, and Dean Latini said this, and I'll back him up on this. If this is the kind of garbage that J Mac is going to say as he's getting older, he just needs to retire. Because clearly he's this kind of stuff isn't going to help anybody. Because what is he saying with people who may have PTSD or have OCD or ADHD in his congregation? By default, he's saying he's not going to help them because he doesn't believe in it. Anything you don't believe in, you won't waste your time in. So by default, J Mac is saying, say if he does have a combat veteran in his congregation like me, who does have PTSD, guess what? He's not going to help me. He's not going to minister to me. He's not going to do anything. Or if he does, he's just going to say, read your Bible and maybe lay hands on me and pray for me. But that's all he's going to do. Because he won't even acknowledge mental health. Therefore, he won't acknowledge PTSD. So if anybody in the congregation is like me in his congregation, by default, he's saying he will not help them. Because he doesn't believe in what they have. So he's just going to pray for them and say, be on your way. Because he doesn't believe in mental health. This is why the topic of mental health needs to be talked about in churches. And one of the reasons it needs to be talked about, saints, because you got pastors like this who don't even believe in it. They just believe as long as you have Jesus, you're never going to get depressed, you're never going to have anxiety, you're never going to have PTSD, you're never going to have OCD or ADHD. As long as you just believe in Jesus, everything you've ever been through goes away. Wrong. Wrong. But you got pastors like this spewing this ignorant trash. This is why mental health has to be talked about in churches. It has to be. So people like Johnny Mack can shut up and be educated. Otherwise, if they don't, they're not going to help anybody. And again, if this is the kind of crap he's going to put out, J Mac needs to retire. It's time for him to go. Because he's clearly lost his rocker. Because in certain situations, he's no longer helping people. He's literally throwing them under the bus and kicking them to the curb. Well, that's no longer pastoring. Pastoring means to shepherd people. This ain't shepherding. This is throwing them under the bus. This is what you're going to do, J Mac. It's time for you to retire. You need to go because you're no longer pastoring. You're just spewing this stuff out in your old age, waiting for, your time to go and be with Jesus. But this is helping nobody. And if this is your definition of pastoring, you're not pastoring anymore. You need to go. It's time for you to retire. So I'm not even going to say like and subscribe and all that. You do what y'all want. But as a 20-year veteran, 4-time combat veteran, 3 tours in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan, this is appalling. This is insulting. It's appalling. And he owes every single person who's been through a traumatic event or our combat veterans an apology. And so does Costi Hinn for supporting it. As some preachers say, if you can't say amen, say ouch. But God bless everybody. I'll see y'all next time. Jesus still loves you, don't I do too. God bless.